Shmaybe.
Hello, everyone. My name is Silvio from shmaybe.com, and this is going to be my first review. And for the first review, I've read the most recent book I've read was Mike Shel's The Aching God. Now, Mike Shel is an RPG designer, a tabletop designer, that is, from what I understand. And his recent work, his writing work, has been making some circles in the fantasy community, and he was highly praised last year when this book came out, The Aching God. So I decided to give it a go. And before I go into the pros and cons, and I must say that there are not that many cons, I just want to talk about something else for a bit that's kind of adjacent to the nature of this book. And that is the very, I wouldn't say very, but a somewhat obvious D&D or tabletop pen and paper structure and style of it. But this is not to say that it's a con. It's not a negative at all. I don't think so. Now, when I think about D&D inspired novels, we have official Forgotten Realms novels back in the day. If anyone read works by R.A. Salvatore, Legends of Drizzt and stuff like that, or even some of the licensed tie-in works like, I don't know, Warcraft novels, if anyone's familiar with that, or even just some of the more recent authors that have sort of embraced the D&D influence. For example, Sam Sykes is, in my opinion, writes very engaging, very fun, very pulpy, but really pulpy fun. There's nothing wrong with pulpy adventure. These kind of novels all share kind of the same thing, where you can sort of see that they started as a D&D session, because oftentimes than not, you'll have very familiar structure. Oh, this is a party of people. There is a starting scene. Most of the time, this scene is there is a inciting incident, and the party comes together, and more oftentimes than not, they're unfamiliar with each other, but through sort of obstacles that they go through, they become much more closer and reach their goal eventually, right? And I also have this theory that a recent subgenre that's, I think, closely related to the D&D novel, that sort of thing, is lit RPG. And lit RPG is a somewhat new, not a new genre, subgenre. It stands for literary RPG, or sometimes they're even called progression RPG or progression novels. And if D&D novel, D&D inspired novel, usually comes off as okay, this is very improvised sort of tale that stemmed from its tabletop nature, because most of the time, if you ever played D&D or anything similar, it's not exactly scripted. A DM, a dungeon master, person who is sort of not taking control, is shaping the narrative, is responsible for the obstacles on the way, but the decision making is still up to the players. And with lit RPGs, it sort of takes a step further, in which um, it's almost like reading a playthrough of a game. Now, that sounds incredibly boring to some. To some, it sounds something they uh, enjoy very much. I'm kind of on the fence, because oftentimes than not, it's like, yes, hearing about competent characters uh, going through their lives, going through their quest, and achieving things, and uh, constantly improving, and you can see a clear improvement. But to me, it's like too much telling and not enough showing. But to each his own, right? And so the theory, in my long-winded ramble, I've been trying to say is that I think that lit RPG is a subgenre of a D&D novel, or even a close relative, let's say. And this is, I would say, a firmly D&D inspired novel, because you have a party of people who haven't met before, and they are engaged on a quest. However, the reason why I think this works very well is, unlike many similar novels of this kind, uh, one thing that really comes across are the characters, because they're very fleshed out. And more than that, in D&D inspired novels, oftentimes, to me, there seems to be a disconnect between characters and the setting they're in, because oftentimes I think that the setting becomes interchangeable. You have this cast of characters, they're dropped just like in a tabletop session in this world, and we do find bits of pieces throughout the adventure, but it never, well, not never, let's not deal with absolutes now. It often doesn't feel like this is a lived world, like everything is thought out, which, to be fair, it doesn't have to be uh, planned out in every meticulous detail. It's, after all, a pulpy adventure. And The Aching God, I wouldn't call it a pulpy adventure. I would call it a very well written novel that, yes, has some gaming influences. A structure is a bit influenced by those works, but the characters really come to life, and they do not feel like they're not part of the world. Quite the contrary. I think that the world is very well thought out, despite the things like numerous gods, that they are real, just like in tabletop sessions, and you have clerics and warrior priests and priests of this sect and that sect. But one thing I really appreciate here is, yes, the characters are really well done, but the world is, I could clearly see that the author has had everything sketched out in his head or in his notes or whatever, but he never showed his full hand. There were no huge info dumps at all. He achieved something that is rather not super rare, but oftentimes than not, especially in genre fiction, like in science fiction and in fantasy, info dumps and exposition, well, which is another word for exposition, are inevitable, because you need to sell people on this world you've crafted. And I think that Mike Shell has definitely succeeded. So the world is very well realized, because uh, we've shown a glimpse of the part of the world, of the culture that is relevant and interesting to us as readers and to the characters. Also, one thing I really appreciated was older characters. I love older characters because, as much as I love coming of age stories, there's so many of these, and when you stumble upon a main character who is older, more experienced, already um, has already gone through um, life with a wealth of knowledge and relationships, and this is oftentimes a very competent character, but his age changes the narrative quite a bit, I think. And our main character is Auric. Auric is a former member of Serenic League. Now, Serenic League in this world are essentially a stand-in for an adventurers guild, essentially. I mean, they are sometimes even referred by the common folk as an adventurers. And Serenic League is this. What makes it interesting for me is usually, when you see this kind of order, especially such an obvious stand-in for an adventurous league, you often think, that, oh yeah, they are the guys who just go out on a dungeon run, to use tabletop vocabulary. They come back and sell their loot in this uh, adventurers guild, or they use this adventurers guild to resupply and go. And I don't think this is quite the case here. Yeah, they do all these things, but the Serenic League is very well thought out. They are more than just adventurers, because in this world, there is a sort of a religious schism that happened a long time ago. And like I referred later, there are different sects. There is this whole pantheon of gods, but they all more or less um, coexist. But there is this ancient civilization, which is another trope, but a trope that's, I think, done well here, that worshipped. It's not quite clear, but they remind me a lot of the Mayan culture, because they're always referred as a very advanced, very um, powerful nation of people who um, held very abhorrent rituals, necromancy, cannibalism, those kind of things. Essentially, they were involved in some very shady stuff. And uh, this world belief, or the world that Auric, our main character, knows, is, and everyone else for that matter, this ancient civilization was struck down by the current pantheon of gods for their actions, for their barbarity, for the lack of a better word. And so they are gone as people, but what they left behind are numerous ruins and artifacts and magic. Yes, the magic in this world is done in a way that this ancient civilization had their own very complicated language, and the Serenic League, our main character, is a part of. Well, he was a part of. Like I said, he's old. I should really structure this videos better. I'm sorry. And the Serenic League is a guild of not only of adventurers, but they are essentially archaeologists and explorers and scientists, even, because they employ people who are uh, regular members, sort of people who are well versed in self-defense, but they also undergo very detailed linguistic, history, and those who show affinity. Even alchemy is employed by the League. So usually, how this works is Serenic League is supported by the monarchy in this world, and they're sent on this or that uh, errand to explore this ruin, to retrieve an artifact, and so on. And our character, Auric, he is retired. He lives in a county, what is it, a county? Like a barony, I think, that's far away from the dangers. And the way the novel starts is with essentially a nightmare. We find out very soon that our character suffers from a very extreme form of PTSD. Uh, he retired to this village, and he was a commoner. He's often plagued by not only horrors that happened on his previous expedition, of which he was the only survivor, but he's also plagued by the voice of his father, who was a common tanner, and which is one of the reasons he's also hesitant to pursue a relationship with a local noblewoman. And essentially, the whole story is kicked off with a letter, a letter from a citadel, and a citadel is a sort of a headquarter in the capital of. It's a Serenic League headquarters. So he uh, goes to this capital to answer the summons, essentially, and on the way there, his first companion is an old soldier, a servant of this local noblewoman, who he befriends quite fast. What was his name? Beric, I think. Bellic, friend Bellic, yes. He is one of my favorite characters. He's this sort of a gentle giant warrior poet sort of character, a character who has hidden depths. I always like those characters. So, and on the way to the capital, they meet a third character of their party, a priestess or a blue priestess, which is in the local pantheon is this god of mercy, and essentially they are like a caste of healers. And she's badly wounded, so they take her. I'm not going to spoil how and why. They take her to the capital, and they enter the citadel to answer the summons. And Auric finds out that his whole former order is suffering a huge plague. The whole place has been quarantined, but one of the people who's afflicted by this supernatural plague is his only surviving daughter. He was previously married. He's a widower. His wife has committed suicide, and his son died. So he has his only child, who, against his wishes, has followed his footsteps and joined the Serenic League. And she is afflicted by this plague. And the source of this plague is an artifact that 30 or so years ago was retrieved from the ruins of the ancient civilization, and one of the members has cut themselves. And this kind of kickstarted, I guess, the whole thing. And this happened, I think 2 weeks ago. Yeah, the artifact was retrieved years and years ago, but when they were moving it, some of the guys from the Saranic League has cut himself and somehow awakened it, and it has spread across the citadel. Now, I don't want to spoil this book. This is a very, very beginning of the book. I really, guys, recommend you to read it because it was fantastic. Now, he finds out that the only way to save his daughter and to save the rest of his order is to rejoin the order and to return this artifact to the place where he found it. Now, the reason why this works so well, and the reason why I like Oryx so much is because he is a very competent character, yes, but he's also plagued by PTSD, and he doesn't hide it. On numerous occasions, he presents his views on just how unglamorous his life was, how badly his last expedition went, how much he blames him for himself. He doesn't consider himself to be a strong leader. In fact, there is a passage on one occasion where he is sort of mentally going through his whole party and sort of giving a comment on their competence. And he goes, "Yeah, this person has reacted very well in a crisis. This person is very impulsive, but they have a right head on their shoulders, or this person is very capable but inexperienced." And he goes through this whole list, and at the end he's like, "Well, they're all good. I think they all do fine on this journey. So what am I missing?" And then he's like, "Oh, I'm missing myself. Am I the best possible person to lead this?" And I appreciate this very much because it's not like he has this crippling self-doubt. He knows he has to do this. He's the only person to do this, and he needs to do this because a member of his family is also inflicted and no one else is going to do it. But it is never thrown aside. He's not a two-dimensional character. And he goes on this journey, and not to spoil the rest of the book, the whole events kind of go off from there. Now, I want to talk about pacing, because I think the pacing on this was very well done. You usually don't expect such a well-done pacing from a D&D inspired book, because you always have these slow periods of time, especially when they're traveling. It's like in D&D, there's this very common trope of, oh, the characters are now on the boat and nothing is happening. Or, oh, maybe they are attacked by pirates. And our characters, spoilers, are attacked by pirates. But it's a very minor occurrence. And I think even in the times of, for the lack of the better word, mundanity, which is not real, what Mike Shel achieves fantastically is the atmosphere, because he manages to build an atmosphere that's very effective, but it's not grimdark. I would never call this a grimdark novel. I think if Mike Shel wanted to do a grimdark novel, he could have easily done it, because some of the descriptions of the nightmares that Auric has in the past, some of the gruesome encounters they have on their journey. But I think he maintains this very steady level of dread that doesn't get old. It kind of builds upon itself. And I think the way he achieved this is one, the nightmares, and second thing is this um, almost an illusion of um, this world has this kingdom, I should say, has this almost an air of, well, I wouldn't say a prosperous nation, but sufficiently advanced nation. Yes, they have this barbaric tribes attacking them from the borders, which I thought was kind of unnecessary. To be honest, it's one of the tropes that I've never liked. It's like, oh yes, we have this trope of great nation that had existed for millennia, because I think the kingdom here is kind of a bit of a stand-in for decaying Roman Empire that is besieged by Germanic tribes and Vandals and stuff like that. It's not mentioned a lot, but I was kind of not into it. But that's a very, very minor nitpick. And you have this creeping suspicion that there's something very wrong with this world, because I'm not going to spoil it, but the monarchy, some of the nobles' behavior, and I'm not talking about a caricature of a nobleman who kills people for fun. No, I think there are some very, very not clearly defined, very vague things, very implied things that kind of give off an aura that something's very off, and I really like it. It kind of contributes to the whole atmosphere, because um, the pacing of the novel is such that, so the title of the novel is The Aching God, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the artifact they're trying to return is related to the Aching God, but uh, it's not like the whole point is to get there. Yes, the whole point is to cure everyone from this plague, to save everyone, but um, everything they do on their journey is somehow either related to the solving the puzzle they're presented with, because they're not sure if the whole quest is going to work, or contributes to the just relationship building between characters. And I think this is fantastic. I mean, there are, for example, there is a character that kind of reminded me of Jezal, if that's the proper pronunciation, if anyone has read the First Law series. And there's this character who is a very talented swordsman, but he's an idiot. Well, not an idiot. He's not stupid, but his attitude is a problem. He's a douchebag. And you get a sense that this person is maybe has a bit of an attitude problem, but they are a valuable member of the group, and you kind of find out why are they behaving the way they're behaving, why are they lashing out, and they're just small things that I really like magicians or sorcerers, they're called in this world. Now, there's this very old trope, time-honored trope of a world where magic is real, and now magic is real, but it's feared by the common folk, it's hated by them. And here it's somewhat different. Magic is real. It has been, it's almost like a science. Well, let me correct myself. The alchemy is science in this world, and it's not looked down upon. And the sorcery is kind of like advanced linguistics here, which is also quite nice. And the sorcerers they're kind of conditioned. And so the monarchy has a clear grasp on what they do, because they all have this depending on what type of sorcerer they are. They all have this a ruby or a diamond engraved on their foreheads. And this is one of those things that I mentioned earlier, that something's really off with this world. Because when you think about it, this is very, very unsettling, because your superiors know every single move you're going to make, everything that you're seeing, they can see. It's very, very uneasy, very uneasy realization. And they're not feared, but there are some superstitions that are tied to their order. And maybe superstitions is the wrong word. It's like, since there are a lot of, this is a religious world, and a lot of people are religious, and they have a patron deity they follow, and most of them uh, don't quite trust the sorcerers, because their sort of power comes from this ancient civilization that, by their belief and their dogmas, have been struck down by their gods, their pantheon. But on the other hand, the magic is a very useful tool. It's very ubiquitous, because you have things like sorcerers who serve on ships to help them catch winds, to travel faster on the sea, or to stop things like fires to spread. It's very utilitarian use of magic, right? And that's also something that I really liked in the novel. And the ending is fantastic. The characters are really worth exploring, and I think that I'm going to read the second uh, sequel in the series very soon, because I'm honestly floored by this. 5 stars, because I expected to be a good read, because a lot of the people on r/fantasy that I often agree with have hailed this as a very good read, but I am just in love with this, because it's familiar enough, but again, so well done and fresh, and just a good time. It's not too long, it's very well paced. I don't think it ends on a huge cliffhanger or anything. It's just good. And now, as a side note, I would like to add that reading this has reminded me of an episode of a podcast that I listened to. The podcast is Writing Excuses. It's a podcast by Brandon Sanderson and some of his writing colleagues. And one of the episodes discusses religion and fantasy. And one thing that really struck me with this book is in the podcast, Brandon, who is a very religious person, he's a Mormon. He talks about um, sort of asking himself a question: Are there atheists? Could there be atheists in a world where there is a proof of God, or where there is the proof of divine, right? And his opinion is yes, yeah, it can lead to a very interesting characters, but you got to do it right. And there is a scene in this book that kind of illustrates this. It's towards the end. I think it illustrates this sort of question very well, and it struck me. So thank you guys for watching this. I decided to start this YouTube channel because a few months ago I started a blog on which I review books that I read, and I'm kind of decided to try my hand at making videos, and I apologize for the audio quality and video quality. But I just wanted to share my appreciation of this book. And if you want to visit my website, it's shmaybe.com. And again, my name is Silvio, and thank you for listening. Bye bye.